Hello and welcome to episode 361 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Hello, Ian. How are you enjoying fake summer #1 in Chicago?
We're done with that.
Oh, you're done? Oh,
it snowed today. Yeah.
I figured because that's happening to us tomorrow. So you've already had the whole summer experience in Chicago where it got really warm, really nice. Everyone goes outside. A thunderstorm absolutely destroys everyone's day at O'Hare. And now you're back in winter.
Exactly. You just described the last 48 hours in Chicago.
Yeah, yesterday was bad at O'Hare. Like mid-July thunderstorm. Bad.
So what made it worse for just air traffic in general was that it was a very large storm.
American United having 5,000 flights a day.
And 4,700 of them were to Kalamazoo. We've been picking on Kalamazoo a lot lately.
I mean, it deserves it.
What made it worse was not just the severity of the storm as it impacted Chicago, but the weather system was so large that it actually impacted flights all the way up into Canada. So the holding that had to take place outside of the storm itself, Lot was holding over, I want to say northern Minnesota
Kalamazoo.
At some point. Yeah, they were way up there at some point. There were flights that were holding super far west, like Nebraska. And then there were flights that were just trying to thread the needle in between the bands of the storm. But it was not fun flying.
Cool
yesterday.
stuff for early March with, I think I saw reports of, I'll quote, DVD-sized hail, which I think you have to be of a certain age to understand, but that's big. That's really,
why can't we just use the metric system?
I don't know. It's easier to compare it to outdated forms of media than it is to say 15 centimeters.
Okay, great. Yes, but there was in fact hail. Oh, all right. We eased into things, and now we can talk about this week's news. There is a lot of it, some of it good, most of it not, but we're going to get into it. And by the end of the show, there will be a few bright spots, and Pechmo Air has a major announcement to make at the end of the show.
Wow, I love those.
So stick around for that. Let's dive back into the Middle East, where, of course, we are on week 2 of what is now a regional war. There have been numerous airspace closures that remain in place, and even additional airspace closures have gone in place since we last spoke. At the moment, of course, Iran, Iraq, Israel, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar are all still closed. There are portions of Saudi Arabia that are closed, and there are now portions of Azerbaijan that are closed. That being the result of an attack on an airport in the Azerbaijani exclave next to Iran late last week. That resulted in not only the closure of that airspace, but the Azerbaijani government moving up the line where aircraft cannot fly to basically exclude the southern half of Azerbaijan, which further compresses all of the airspace into about 50 miles wide passing through Azerbaijan. The UAE is open, sort of.
Kind of. Varies by the minute.
So the NOTAMs cover where you can and can't go out. So we talked about that last week. But there have been continued attacks on Dubai Airport, especially as recently as today, Wednesday, March 11th, where an attack on the airport injured some folks on the airfield. Thankfully, not many serious injuries, but a few. There have also been flights restarted at Doha. Not to say that those are commercial flights, but those are repatriation and rescue flights being operated out of Doha by Qatar Airways. Those have been stilted at best. Looking at yesterday's numbers, Qatar Airways actually doubled from the day previous. So Monday, they operated 42 total flights. And on Tuesday, they operated 66. So not doubled. I'm looking at the wrong numbers. But they did not double, but they increased from 42 to 66. From earlier in the week, they did in fact double. So still rising, but albeit slowly. Bahrain Gulf Air was able to not operate passenger flights, but just get their aircraft out of Bahrain.
Get everything out.
Yes. So there was a mass exodus, similar to watching flights leave Oshkosh, where they just all took off one after the other, after the other, after the other, and got out of there. So at the moment, looking at open airspace or operational airlines that are operating flights in the region, Air Arabia is operating at about 60% capacity. Emirates is operating at about 60% capacity. Etihad is operating well below that at roughly 15% capacity. Fly Dubai is operating a little over 50%, and Qatar is operating at about 12%. So varies across the region in airspace that is sort of open, but not really. And these things are all minute by minute, day by day.
Yeah, DXB, Dubai, seems to be doing better now than I figured it would have been. Depending where you look, there's somewhere between 13 and maybe 20% of flights canceled. So it seems like a majority of flights are actually getting out, despite an attack at the airport literally today injuring people. But it really seems like Dubai is the only thing in the Middle East, in that region of the Middle East, actually really operating with some semblance of, I don't want to say normalcy, but reliability, while others, Abu Dhabi, Doha, Kuwait, they're just essentially completely shut down.
Yeah. I mean, aside from a few specific repatriation flights that have been operating in a banked way, they're not open.
Yeah. And somehow I haven't looked at Amman, Jordan before right now. And somehow they're squeaking flights out pretty reliably.
They've been very, very punctual about their operation throughout. So yeah, that's one of the, I guess, bright spots here. A little surprising that they've been able to continue to operate flights as well as they have, but they've been doing it. Because of the airspace closures in the region, other airlines from outside the region are adding flights to cover some of that capacity, but also bring their citizens home. Air India Group, for instance, has added dozens of flights between Air India and Air India Express. They've added dozens of flights, mostly operating to airports in Saudi Arabia and Oman, so that they can bring Indian nationals back to India. But they and other airlines are also extending long-haul services, not necessarily in the region itself, in Saudi Arabia or Oman or Jordan or something like that, but from their own bases to pick up some of the slack for the carriers who are not currently operating flights. So Air India added a bunch of flights to European destinations, as well as a few North American destinations. And of course, they added new flights to Sri Lanka and Mali, because you still need to go on vacation as well.
Oh, of course.
So, New York, London, Frankfurt, Paris, Amsterdam, Zurich. So those were just the Air India specific long hauls, adding 78 additional flights on 9 routes, totaling 17,660 seats between the 10th of March and the 18th of March. So that's a lot of additional flying.
Yes, and we also see beyond Indian Airlines, we've talked about Norse adding some flights as well, and then Lufthansa Group. Also, Lufthansa Prime, I guess you could say, and Austrian also expanding intercontinental services at what they say is short notice. They say significantly increased demand, particularly for Asia and Africa. So Lufthansa plans to add several extra flights on short notice from the Munich hub to Singapore, as well as 2 special flights from Frankfurt to Cape Town and back, which are available for booking, as well as, this one's quite interesting, flights from Frankfurt to Riyadh are planned, but I guess not bookable yet. Austrian Airlines also arranged 10 special flights from Vienna to Bangkok and back, which is quite interesting. So airlines are doing what they can to add what they can, where they can, how they can, which is aerospace. The airline industry is a global thing. Just because the conflict is in the Middle East, it doesn't mean you don't have people that are stranded in Bangkok trying to get back to Munich who were originally flying through Abu Dhabi and now can't.
Exactly.
So it's good to see other airlines, I don't want to say see an opportunity here for profit, because hopefully these flights aren't very expensive and they're operating it out of the goodness of their heart, but I'm sure there's also some money to be made here.
They're filling a need.
Yes, they are absolutely filling a need.
I haven't seen any accusations of price gouging or anything like that. And I'm sure they're reasonably priced given the situation, because a lot of this is at the behest of national governments. But they're still going to make the money rather than Emirates or Etihad.
Yes, theoretically, I mean, all of these are great to plan, to do things, to bring people home, unless your pilots go on strike. Then it's really hard to do much of anything.
Yeah, of course. Because Lufthansa has scheduled a bunch of extra flights, Lufthansa pilots have decided that Thursday and Friday of this week is a perfect time to go on strike.
Cool.
But these specific flights, especially the flights to the Middle East, are not going to be affected.
Oh, how nice of them. Thank you. I guess strike season, just like thunderstorm season in Chicago, is starting early this year.
Well, it's a continuation of the existing strike season. This is like the winter strike season.
Oh, okay. I guess we're just seamlessly transitioning
to
from
the
winter to summer strike season.
It's the shoulder strike season.
Okay. Well, I mean, you just can't win with Lufthansa Group. But hopefully these flights they've added, I guess the Austrian flights will operate because that's not Lufthansa. But good to see airlines. Haven't heard anything out of the US airlines adding any frequencies to anywhere right now. But if there's any time of the year that it can do it, it's probably right now, because we are not yet in summer peak season. But outside of these handful of airlines, there's probably a smattering of other small additions, but not enough to get something like a press release like we did out of Lufthansa Group.
Right. Let's talk about some of the other ongoing effects. We talked about the price of jet fuel doubling last week, and now we've got some numbers. The average price of jet fuel last week, this is from the IATA Jet Fuel Price Monitor, helpfully named. They say that between 27 February and 6 March, the index value rose from 271.7 to 430.3, with a weekly average price for the barrel of 157.41, up 58%.
Yeah, that means if you're planning any long-haul travel, especially to Asia, later this year, book it now before airlines have a chance to adjust if they haven't already.
And some airlines have had a chance to adjust.
They sure have.
There are airlines that are currently adding fuel surcharges, Air India being one of them. They announced pretty transparently what the fuel surcharge would be for different regional flights, depending on where your flight was operating from and to. And then Scandinavian SAS has also introduced a fuel surcharge, and a few other airlines have either already introduced them or they are planning on to, or prices are just going up, fuel surcharge or not. And Air New Zealand has suspended its yearly fiscal guidance because, quote, the crisis is expected to meaningfully affect second half earnings, and accordingly, the airline has suspended guidance until fuel markets and operating conditions stabilize.
Oof. I guess this is the end of the post-COVID downturn boom in air travel resurgence, I guess. I don't know what you want to put it, but whatever good times were being had up until about 2 weeks ago, they're gone. And who knows when they'll come back. Wars have consequences, and some of those consequences are pretty inconsequential in the grand scheme of things, but fuel is extremely volatile, both in price and exploding stockpiles up in places is not great. But
also not great.
This is what happens. Any sort of uncertainty in the market makes fuel price go very quickly high. And it's going to take airlines a little while to realize that, but it's going to happen. And it's going to happen quickly at this point.
So we'll keep a close eye on this and see where things go in terms of the price of jet fuel, but also where ticket prices are headed. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like they're headed anywhere but up.
Oh, my regular flight to Dulles in July is now somehow $900. So that's cool.
That's something.
That's the day after the World Cup, not fuel. But hey.
Good luck with that. Let's completely switch gears and talk about an airplane that's missing part of its gear.
Hey, it's Air India again.
Air India Express Flight 938 today landed a bit harder than it should have based on video evidence.
It landed a couple
seen.
times more.
It landed a couple times. It landed hard, bounced, and landed again. In that process, the nose gear wheels, both of them, separated from the aircraft. It landed safely, stopped on the runway, and there are no reports of injuries. However, because Phuket's a single runway airport, there were at least 19 diversions and a whole host of cancellations. Because if there's a plane stuck on the runway, you can't use the airport.
Yeah, there's actually video of this aircraft coming in because this is very similar to St. Martin, where there's a beach right beside the runway, which is pretty cool. I actually had a friend from the Dots Lines Destination podcast in a group chat who was actually at Phuket 25 minutes away from departure of his flight, which obviously did not happen. Still there. So are a lot of the aircraft that ended up elsewhere. We were particularly interested to see what would happen to a 767-300 operated by Azur Air, because that's a Russian flag aircraft at this point. So it can't just go anywhere in particular. There are sanctions out there, but it diverted from Phuket to whatever, Hat Yai International Airport in Thailand. I can't imagine there's much intercontinental service from there outside of a couple of regional flights. So looking at that one to see what happens, where that goes. Could be fun. Could be there a while.
Hopefully things get back to normal. So they have moved the aircraft and the airport has since recommenced, but obviously delays are ongoing. We'll be very interested to get the FDR readout from that aircraft because based on the video, definitely a hard landing. Was it a microburst? Was it wind shear? Very interested to see what was happening there and if that can tell us anything. Because the approach up until that point didn't really look unusual in any way, shape, or form. So it'll be interesting to see what that investigation tells us. Korean auditors looking into the situation, not necessarily the aviation situation, but the decision-making process that went into the airport design and construction at Muan, where the Jeju Air 737-800 crashed into what was supposed to be an earthen berm, but was in fact a giant concrete wall buried in an earthen berm. What the auditors have found is that that berm was built in concrete as a way to reduce the costs associated with the airport's development.
Yeah, we knew the circumstances that it was there. It was not supposed to be there, but we didn't know why it was there, I don't think, until this point. But to have this revelation that it was there simply to save money is just something I never would have expected out of a country like South Korea. This is something I would have expected somewhere that doesn't have any sort of safety regulations or doesn't have much infrastructure. But for an airport in South Korea to do something so blatantly stupid, like substitute dirt for concrete, is just kind of mind-blowing. I'm still processing that this could happen in a country like South Korea.
So what happened was South Korea went on an airport building and modernization, I don't want to call it spree, but a large number of airports were either built or modernized. And as part of that, in building out the airports and then installing ILS systems to make those airports usable in climate weather, they had to slope the runways at a certain grade. This particular runway has a greater slope at the end because it allowed them to save money on the earthwork. So they had to move less dirt, and that reduced the construction costs. But in order to put the localizer antenna at the right height relative to the runway, they had to build it higher, and they did that with concrete.
Not great.
So a series of decisions going into the fact that we're going to save money on dirt and we're going to spend it on concrete, and that's not going to meet safety regulations.
Yeah. So, I mean, from YouTube engineering videos I've seen, grading surface is not a trivial task. It's not a fast task. It's not a cheap task. But then to go and then substitute dirt for concrete in something that is supposed to be movable is just insane to me.
So, yeah, I'm not sure. Having discovered this, they have begun work to rectify the situation, which is, I guess, a story as old as time. Try and save money. Something bad happens. You figure out what happened. What happened was you tried to save money, and
it costs a whole lot more now.
And now it's going to cost a whole lot more to fix the problem. So
it's also just mind-numbing to me that nobody at any point in this project thought like, why are we pouring concrete here? This seems weird. People do what they're told, I guess.
Yeah, they generally do. Let's move on to some Boeing news. Boeing is once again reworking 737 MAX aircraft that it has produced yet not delivered. That is because some of the wires in the aircraft have some small scratches because of a manufacturing defect. Boeing says it's not a safety of flight issue, but they want to make sure that it gets reworked before they deliver these aircraft. They have not said which wires. They have not said how many. They have not said where they're located, but they're working on it. So good.
Cool, I guess. Feel like we've heard this story before.
Boeing, for its part, says this will not affect their production or delivery schedule for 2026.
Okay, sure.
And that's probably good because in the midst of all of this, it is now being reported that China is said to be considering a large order for up to 500 737 MAX aircraft.
It's a lot of wires that they're going to have to make sure aren't scratched.
That order is likely, if it comes to pass, and this is a big if, because if you'll remember, last year there was also an order for up to 500 aircraft that China was considering placing that never came to pass.
Which way is the wind blowing today? Is it out of the east or the west? Or?
Exactly. We may never know. But if it does come to pass, it is likely to take place when President Trump visits China at the end of March, beginning of April.
Just dust off the press release from last time, scratch out the year, write 2026, and you're golden.
Exactly. Separately, there is also a proposed deal under consideration for wide-body aircraft where Chinese airlines would order 100 787 and 777X aircraft.
Now that's more interesting.
Yes. Either order would be the first order for Boeing aircraft from China since 2017.
Yeah, this one would be, I don't care about the 7.3. Nobody cares about that. But the 7.8, the 7.8 and the 777X orders, those are huge, but also significant, I think, in the impact of China's faith in its own homegrown wide-body airliner program. It's 100 7.8s and 777s. That's no small order. So maybe that's a signal that they're not so confident that they'll have their own homegrown solution to wide-body aircraft.
But is the C929 expected to even be certified before the end of the decade?
I mean, would they take any 787s or 777Xs by the end of this decade? I don't know.
787s, maybe.
Maybe. Get in line.
That's true as well. So we'll keep an eye on this one towards the end of the month and see if either of those orders actually come to pass. Back in India, IndiGo CEO Elbers has resigned, effective immediately.
No clear replacement in sight either, which means things were probably pretty sudden. But IndiGo has had a rough couple of months. We've talked about them a number of times where India put a new crew rest regulation in place, which for some reason caught IndiGo completely off guard. And its entire network has been in chaos for months at this point. And apparently chaos enough for likely the board or whomever, I guess, to give the CEO the boot and look for someone who can right the ship.
Officially, Elbers resigned effective immediately due to personal reasons and requested that his resignation notice period be waived. Quote, "It has been both an honor and privilege to serve as IndiGo's CEO these past years since September 2022, and being a part of the IndiGo family is a beautiful growth story. And the steps we have made together in this." That doesn't sound like somebody who's leaving because they want to.
No, it's unfortunate. I mean, IndiGo is a massive airline in India, of course. They've outlasted a bunch of their competition. They weathered COVID. They have weathered, for the most part, Pratt & Whitney engines trying to kill them. But this was just one issue too far. It's sad because it seems like a little more foresight and a little more planning could have prevented this entirely. But at the end of the day, that's the CEO's job. Things roll uphill, and this one was too big a falter for them to guess I just look the other way. But it's, I think, not all that many years, but a pretty accomplished reign for him over the last few years at IndiGo. But it is what it is. I'm sure he'll fail upwards or whatever. Everyone always does.
Sideways somewhere, at least.
Somewhere. Yeah. He's not
After
so
he spends
tainted.
time with his family.
Of course. He's got to go on vacation. He's probably booked on IndiGo, but he'll land somewhere. I'm sure of it.
Let's see. Just to round out this story, airline founder Raul Bhatia will take over as the interim CEO while they search for a permanent replacement. Let's go to Brussels, where we have the preliminary report on the SAS flight that decided a taxiway was good enough and tried to depart before rejecting the takeoff and coming to stop far too close to no
a fuel
longer
farm
on a paved surface and a fuel farm than I think all of us are comfortable with. The preliminary report doesn't give us a ton of new information. It does put some flight data recorder data in our hands. The aircraft made it up to 127 knots over the ground, which jives with the granular data that we received from the aircraft via ADS-B. The final position of the aircraft is where we knew it was, but we learned a bit more information about why it turned the way it did. It turned the way it did because the first officer said, hey, we don't want to be here. There's a fuel farm in front of us and a fence. We should turn.
I think that's the best thing they decided to do that day. That was a good idea.
Ended up near a taxiway, kind of off to the side of one of the taxiways. Thankfully, they did not try and continue this departure because there is a fuel farm very close to where they would have been lifting off from. So that's something. The other interesting thing about the report to me was that the air traffic controller did not immediately want to interrupt them and say anything, because by the time they noticed what was happening, it seemed like the aircraft was already rejecting its takeoff. So that's another interesting thing to me, that there wasn't enough situational awareness in either the flight deck or in the ATC tower to see that they were not, in fact, on the runway.
Yeah, and all we have is the transcript. But from the CVR, we know that the flight crew was proceeding. They were going through their checklist. They were making sure there was no one else on the runway, which ended up being a taxiway. But they said clear left, clear right, line up checklist. And then the next thing they say is takeoff runway, C6 runway 07 right. And then, yes. So they were going through the checklist. They were actually countering each other to make sure that they were in the right place at the right time, pointed in the direction they were supposed to be. But at no point did anyone actually look around and say, wait, this is a taxiway, not a runway. So what is this phenomenon called, where it's something bias, I think, where you're just running through the motions and not actually doing the thing the checklist is asking you to do? I know there's a term for this, but I don't remember what.
Well, if you remember, before we go and look it up and put it in the show notes, email us at podcast@avr24.
Is it confirmation bias? I
don't know if that's specifically what we're looking there. I mean, confirmation bias is a thing,
but I don't know if it's that.
I don't think that's the term that we're looking for here. I will say that SAS, for its part, has said, okay, we need to install airport moving maps in the flight deck. And what that does is it provides a precise position on a very detailed airport diagram. So things like this shouldn't happen again. So good on SAS for that.
We know SAS has a lot of experience with GPS not working, don't we?
This is true. We mark 12 years this week since the disappearance of Malaysian Airlines Flight 370. As part of the effort to find that aircraft, the latest effort of ocean-going search has turned up empty again. Unfortunately, they were unable to find any trace of that aircraft in their most recent search, which concluded a few weeks ago. So Malaysia is still working to find that aircraft. There is an ocean salvage company that is working on a no find, no fee basis. So I guess they're going to keep looking, hopefully again at some point. But this latest round did not find anything.
Yeah, this sucks. It's been so long. I think this predates our podcast even by a good margin.
Few years.
a few years. It just doesn't seem like we're ever going to know what happened or where that aircraft is at this rate. There have been so many attempts to find this aircraft and so many expeditions out in incredibly inhospitable places. I have a hard time believing it's ever going to be a different story at this point.
Yeah. At this point, I almost feel like it's more likely that someone will accidentally find it.
I've been saying that for years. It's going to be after we're all long dead and gone. Someone in 200 years is just going to be scraping minerals off the bottom of the Indian Ocean or something, and they're going to run into this thing. I think that's the only way it's going to happen. Pure coincidence.
Late last week, the NTSB released its preliminary report into the Bombardier Challenger crash that occurred in Bangor, Maine at the end of January. This was a crash that occurred in a heavy snowstorm where the aircraft was stopping in Bangor for fuel en route to France. The pilot, co-pilot, and 4 passengers were killed when the aircraft crashed just after takeoff in Bangor. The preliminary report has an extensive discussion on the movement of the aircraft on the ground in Bangor, the amount of de-icing and anti-icing that the aircraft experienced, as well as how long the aircraft was on the ground after it had been de-iced. They also included the CVR transcript indicating that the crew discussed how long they had after de-icing to get airborne.
Which was not long.
Right. One of the pilots commented that the standard time was 14 to 18 minutes. And if they had to wait more than a half hour, they would return to the ramp to de-ice again. The co-pilot concurred with that. However, the charts included in the preliminary report show that they did not, in fact, have that much time. Given the amount of snowfall, or the rate of snowfall, and the outside air temperature, the maximum holdover time for that particular application from the start of the application was 9 minutes.
Ooh. So they had to get from the beginning of de-icing to taking off in 9 minutes?
Correct.
Can you even do that? Is that even physically possible?
I would think yes. I mean, the Challenger's not that large of an aircraft. So I would think that you could, on the outside, make that 9 minute time. So in my mind, this leads to questions about operation at all. I mean, if we're looking at, these decisions, should this flight have been operated at all?
This was during the blizzard we had a while back. Was this in January?
The end of January 26th, yeah.
January 26th. Okay, so not quite the blizzard we had here, but yeah, if you're having snow that heavy, you have precious few minutes between when you're able to de-ice and actually take off. And this is why a lot of aircraft at commercial airports get de-iced and then end up not getting out anyway, because it just takes too long to just start your engines back up, run checklists, get out of the way, taxi to where you need to go and actually take off. It's complicated stuff and a lot of moving parts. And in this case, they got the math wrong, I guess.
They got something wrong. And unfortunately, they got it very, very wrong. This same situation happened at Amsterdam, where you had not a crash, but you had aircraft that were de-icing and then driving around the runway or driving around the taxiways and then having to go back to the gate, de-ice again.
That's how you run out of de-icing fluid.
Yeah.
Yeah. Should we stick in Amsterdam for our next story, I think? Because
let's go to Amsterdam for our next story.
Good news for airlines and passengers. Bad news, I guess, for people who don't like airports and airplanes. But apparently we've been talking about this for years, where the government in the Netherlands has tried to reduce the number of flights at Schiphol quite dramatically, actually. But apparently the Council of the State, or whatever, this is a translated article getting from telegraph.nl, the Council of the State has annulled the amended airport traffic decree on Wednesday, meaning they are no longer, I think, allowed to set a maximum number of flights, which was quite low and would have really, really hampered KLM's operation there at its one and only hub. So I guess that's it. We're done. We're probably never going to hear about this story that we've been hearing about since June 2022. I don't believe that. I'm sure we'll hear about this again and something will happen. But apparently, the Council of the State said that the recorded number of aircraft movements does not provide sufficient insight into the amount of noise. So basically, they can't say, does the lower limit on aircraft movements really impact the people around the airport? I guess part of the equation there is aircraft are getting quieter and quieter. So does simply reducing the number have the impact that it once would have had? Because it's not like you're dealing with 727s and 747-200s or anything like that. Aircraft are quieter now. So maybe some sort of regulations around aircraft noise rather than just lopping off the top 25% of all operations. Makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. The one thing that the court did leave in place is the reduction of nighttime flights, though. So that's a reduction to 27,000 nighttime flights. So that, I mean, I think generally good news, and no one had appealed that particular decision.
Just don't go full Munich and have a hard cut at like 11:59 p.m.
Right, and then
we'll stay in aircraft overnight. Be a little flexible about it, but that seems to make way more sense to me.
Yeah, exactly. Let's head to South America, shall we?
Sure.
Do we want to talk about Azul first or GOL?
Let's talk about Azul.
All right, let's do it. They're reconfiguring their fleet, and I'm not entirely surprised given the, I guess,
exit from Chapter 11?
Yeah, there's that. But also the lean towards domestic production. But tell me more, Jason. Tell me more.
Well, apparently this comes from Aviation Week. Azul is reshaping its fleet, and it's actually going to prioritize its own homegrown E195-E2 growth and wide-body connectivity, they say, and stepping away from its Airbus A321 XLR plans, which is an interesting move. The quote is that I'm getting again from Aviation Week. I still think this is a phenomenal aircraft, but what's going to be the cost of that aircraft? When we looked at it, we were seeing prices that were bumping up against a wide body, and that's really quite interesting. That's the CEO, John Rogerson, speaking. That's interesting. I thought the whole point of the A321 XLR was to be a modest price bump over the 321 that is far away from the cost of a wide-body aircraft. But
what I'm unclear about with this quote, though, is he talking about the cost to operate the aircraft,
or the
is
cost
he talking about the cost to purchase it?
I would hope it's the cost to purchase it.
Yeah, I think he's talking about the acquisition cost, which to me, I guess, makes a bit more sense given the demand for Airbus aircraft at the moment and how much Airbus can get away with charging for those aircraft. But I get where he's coming from. The other thing that I thought was funny about this is how, different airlines think about their networks, where you have, Azul saying, well, we have domestic Brazilian cities, and then we have other Brazilian cities like Fort Lauderdale, Orlando, Lisbon, and Porto. How would the Portuguese feel about you calling Lisbon another Brazilian city?
That's one way to
see
put
where
it.
he's going with it.
Yeah, Azul's also been a strange fleet story. They're kind of all over the place. They started their wide-body exploration with A330-200s. They've got a bunch of A330-900 Neos. They had some A350s in there at some point. They apparently have two 767-300s, which I don't even think I knew was a thing in their fleet. I think they're actually operated by Euro Atlantic, or maybe they're not anymore. Maybe they're theirs. I don't know. They're all over the place. So I can understand why they might not want to introduce yet another long-haul fleet type into their fleet, because maybe, finish figuring out what you want to do with what you've got before you take a new aircraft. And I think that's a perfect transition into our next story with GOL, which is why I wanted to do it in this order, because apparently GOL is picking up A330 Neos, which will fly here to New York, and they coincidentally have the same exact configuration on the interior that Azul's A330 Neos did. So, I suspect we might see a Brazilian fleet transfer happening soon.
Go figure. Yeah, so the Abra Group, which is the owner of GOL and Avianca, among others, GOL will be getting 5 of the 7 incoming A330neos that the Abra Group is taking. Those will be first deployed to New York. So good for you, Jason.
As all good things are, yes. Because what we need is more connectivity from New York to Brazil. We've got a lot. I think even American flies New York to Brazil, like multiple cities, and American doesn't fly anywhere from New York.
Well, maybe New York needs to be considered a Brazilian city of the North.
Maybe. You know what's not a Brazilian city? It's Cuba, I think. But we're talking about American flying international. But hey, Envoy Air kind of counts as American, right?
Envoy Air counts as American, but you're mixing up 2 stories, man.
I am.
You gotta pick the lane. Are we going to Venezuela or are we going to Cuba?
Oh, wait a minute. No. Venezuela is definitely not Brazil, I don't think.
It's definitely not Cuba.
I'm mixing these 2 up. Yeah, I just moved things around in the show notes a little bit. But yeah, let's pivot and talk about America going to Venezuela then. So apparently, we know because American was very quickly happy to tell us about this, but they sought approval and now have DOT approval to restart its Venezuela operations using its subsidiary Envoy Air, Miami to Caracas and Miami to, I have never even heard of this city, nor did I know American was.
Yeah.
I didn't know did they have operations in Venezuela beyond Caracas before they withdrew? I don't think so.
I don't know if they did to Maracaibo. I think they had other cities in Venezuela, but I'm not sure if they had Maracaibo. But those are the 2 cities that they are planning to operate flights to. They are going to operate daily nonstop service, though it doesn't say exactly when that service will begin.
I got my stories confused because, between Cuba and Venezuela, starting flights, stopping flights, Americans always involved in that. American loves flying to these weird places that other airlines are a little more timid to. But apparently, Cuba has extended its jet fuel shortage warning through the beginning of April. They're probably going to welcome everyone else from Asia to the club and say, hey, we started it first because the way things are going, fuel is going to become problematic for everyone. But this iteration started in Cuba, but for an entirely different reason. But also involves Venezuela. That's fun.
Back in the US, Spirit Airlines is planning to exit its bankruptcy protection in the near future. And as part of that, they are recalling 500 furloughed pilots. Though that's not as great as it sounds, because they're recalling them due to attrition of existing pilots who were not furloughed in the first place.
Yes, lots of Spirit pilots have jumped ship elsewhere while the opportunity is still there. But I guess that's good news for the furloughed pilots. What a way to get your job back, I guess.
Right. Spirit, for its part, is also discussing things about Chicago with the FAA. So we talked about this last week, where United and American are just hitting each other in the face with the sheer number of flights. The FAA has said, okay, we're looking at 2,800 for the number of flights to operate because we think that's a reasonable number. It's up from 2,600 and change from last year, but it's nowhere near the more than 3,000 U2 wanted to operate during the summer. That said, Spirit says, hey, FAA, that sounds great, but you need to make sure that the reductions come from those airlines. Because, quote, at O'Hare, the congestion is the direct and foreseeable consequence of a deliberate scheduling arms race between the airport's 2 dominant carriers. I mean, they're not wrong.
No, they are completely correct for wanting the FAA to reduce only American and United's flights. Because what does Spirit even have left? Didn't they sell all their gates and like their access to like the employee cafeteria or whatever?
That's one of their points. So what Spirit wants the FAA to do in making these reductions, exempt carriers operating 23 or fewer daily round trips from O'Hare from any involuntary
does Spirit
reduction.
Operate 23, exactly 23 daily flights? That's a weird number to pick.
Yeah. Grant prior reduction credits for any documented reductions in scheduled operations to the airport during the preceding year, which means give us credit for selling 2 of our gates.
Yeah, no. I agree with Spirit in principle here, but in practice, they're looking to get partial credit for things they have already done for very different reasons. I don't think it should work that way, but I appreciate the lawyering here is admirable.
And then establish a proportionate reduction in daily operations out of O'Hare based on the magnitude of each carrier's increase in their schedule compared to summer 2025 baseline. I mean, that makes the obvious play here. I mean, that to me is what they should do.
More runways.
It ended up looking like a waffle fry. Just
Annex
north,
Milwaukee
south, east,
and
west,
just
east.
pave a new runway over it.
Oh, boy. Eventually, we'll get there. Let's head north to Toronto because this just got very interesting.
Yeah, you wanted to cut this story at first.
Well,
because I only led with the boring news that,
you buried the lead.
I did bury the lead. Billy Bishop Airport, as on schedule, as they said, has opened its US CBP facility, which allows it to operate two airports in the US that do not have a CBP facility, chiefly, and I think solely, New York LaGuardia. All things come back to New York because Porter and Air Canada already had plenty of flights to the US, or I think maybe only Porter. I don't know if Air Canada had any US flights, but they will now, I believe, starting on the 29th. Air Canada Express, Jazz, whatever, starts 4 daily flights from Toronto City to New York using this new CBB facility. But we are again seeing the little airport right in downtown in Toronto become subject of a heated debate now because apparently Ontario's premier, Doug Ford, who I mean, I'm not even Canadian, let alone do I live in the Greater Toronto area. I'm not a big fan of him, but he has taken interest in Billy Bishop Airport once again, calling it a crown jewel and wants to reclassify the airport, I guess, as completely provincial territory, property, because apparently it is currently split between the City of Toronto, the Toronto Port Authority, and the federal government. The city owns about 20% of the land, according to this article I'm reading from CBC. But apparently, Doug Ford wants it for himself. He wants to extend the runway and introduce jet aircraft, which is the big piece of this story. This is something that anyone who has followed this story knows Porter wanted to do, almost did, was going to acquire the A220 back when it was not the A220, it was the Bombardier C Series. That never happened. They ended up getting the Embraer E2, ended up going to Pearson. But hey, jet aircraft are back on the menu, boys. Maybe.
What's old is new again. What's new will be old soon. I can't imagine that they can do this without spending a ton of money. And to spend a ton of money, it seems like they're going to need to get more approval than just Doug Ford saying, I want to do this.
Yeah, there is physically no space left to extend this runway. If they extend the runway, it will have to be a man-made extension into the water, which is not cheap. Just ask any of the airports around the world who have done that and now are, seeing their airport sink, which is not great. This is a really expensive, really time-consuming, and really involved thing. But apparently they said the federal deadline for the runway extension is July 2027. So things are either going to move real fast or not at all real fast. But I wouldn't mind flying Porter to on an E2 now to Billy Bishop from New York. That'd be fun. A culmination of a couple different pieces of news.
Yeah, absolutely. I would not be against that, but we'll see how long it takes for that, if it ever comes to fruition. One of the aircraft I have never, ever wanted to fly on was Emirates 2 class A380s. And poor me, I will never have that opportunity because they're going away.
Oh, they had 615 seats, 58 business class, 557 economy. They didn't even have premium economy on that thing. But not even Emirates is immune to the, well, maybe up until last week, the boom in premium travel. They will be going to 569 seats, increasing all the way up to 76 business class seats, 56 premium economy, and all the way down to 437 economy seats. First aircraft in April, maybe. At this point, who knows? Full refit done by November. Again, who knows? Anything with the Middle East Airlines at this point is completely hypothetical right now. But yeah, the highest capacity aircraft coming down quite a bit. I don't think I pine for the days of Transaero being out there saying, we'll cram 850 people in an A380. Those days never came to pass, but what a reality that would have been.
Oh, man. It'll happen eventually at some point on some secondary market somewhere, but I don't ever want to know where that is, and I don't want to.
You kind of do, though, right? You kind of do.
I kind of do.
You kind of do.
Part of me wants to. Let's run through some final things to end the episode. Jason, there was a story earlier this week that said a Ryanair 737 had been impounded and repossessed and taken over because of a small bill that Ryanair had not paid. As it turns out, it's really just a parking ticket and a sticker. And I literally mean like sticker.
Yeah, it's a sticker. And if it's anything like New York, a parking ticket is a badge of honor, and you could just keep going about your day and not even take it off the windshield in the hopes you don't get another ticket, because apparently that's how things work here. But this Ryanair 737 wasn't really repossessed, but I guess, where was this again? I accidentally closed the window, and I'm not even sure where it happened anymore, but was it in Belgium?
Yes. So what happened was Ryanair.
I know what happened. I don't remember where it happened.
Oh, okay. Now I've lost it.
Oh, you're going to make me go look at
Linz. It was Linz.
There it is. Thank you. Because it's not an airport I'm familiar with at all whatsoever. But apparently Ryanair owed a passenger $890 in, I guess, compensation for a canceled flight in 2024. And they didn't pay up, as airlines sometimes do not. Ryanair is not alone in that. But if you know the right people, you go through the right process, you fill out the right kind of paperwork, it is not a unique circumstance where an entire aircraft can be repossessed or impounded or grounded. And in this case, that's exactly what happened to a Ryanair 737 in Linz, but it wasn't really impounded. They kind of slapped a sticker on it. They had a 90-minute turn, which for Ryanair may as well be impounding an aircraft. 90 minutes on the ground without flying in the air? That's crazy for Ryanair. But what it actually means, apparently, is that they can operate the aircraft. They just cannot dispose of the aircraft, and I guess they have to keep operating it until they settle this. But I don't know. It wasn't impounded. It wasn't repoed. It was just,
it's not impounded, but it is legally seized.
There you go. They can keep using it.
Ryanair gets to keep its plane, but that aircraft indicates an outstanding debt. And Ryanair can't do anything to legally get rid of that particular aircraft now because it has technically been seized.
Good stuff.
Laws are strange sometimes, but here we are. So Ryanair owes this guy 890 euros, and that includes interest and legal fees. So the actual amount of money that they could have paid him was even less.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
Jason, we've talked before about how Pakistan International Airlines is the one airline that you or I would never want to run. But there's one part of Pakistan International Airlines that would actually be pretty interesting and fun to have.
Probably the only valuable thing.
And that's the Roosevelt Hotel in New York, which is, for some reason, owned by Pakistan International Airlines. Well, the Pakistani government has now said, no, you can't sell the hotel to JP Morgan Chase, which has its global headquarters next door.
Yeah. Do you know why they said no? Because this seems like a no-brainer, like free money.
So what they want to have happen is they want to retain ownership of the property and redevelop it into a skyscraper.
That's expensive. Do they have the means to do that? Because building here in New York is probably the most expensive place in the world to do that.
Yeah, exactly. There was a 2019 paper report finding by consultancy that said, hey, you should probably not have a hotel here anymore. What you should do is turn this into an office tower. Put a hotel in the office tower, but, make it big, and then you can charge people rent for a variety of other things. Then they said, okay, let's do that. They tried to find a buyer for the hotel. They signed an agreement with JLL, and JLL said, no, we can't do it. Then COVID hit, and then they signed an agreement with the city of New York to house people seeking asylum in the US. And then the city canceled that in 2025. And then they said, please, Pakistani government, can we have some money to run the hotel? And the government said no. And so now they also say, but you also can't sell it.
Yeah, don't really understand this logic even one bit.
Well, if you don't understand that logic, Jason, you're never going to get this next story.
Okay, what is it?
I'm going to buy a pair of 757s, only one of which has engines, and a Part 121 certificate. and I'm going to start my own airline.
I like every part of that. 757s, a couple working engines, certificate to actually operate them. What's the catch?
I mean, I think the catch is trying to start an airline and thinking that it could possibly work.
I think 757s and 2 working engines. That's good. You only need 2 to run one of them.
No, it's 3 757s. 2 have engines, 1 does not. This comes out of the now, what's a nice word? Completely and utterly failed New Pacific Airlines.
Oh, that's harsh.
And they were trying to start an airline and become the Icelandair of the West.
It was a good plan. It was a good plan.
Until it wasn't, when you can't operate over water because you don't have ETOPS, or a variety of other things like, hey, you can't use Russian airspace, things like that. But now they're trying to auction off those aircraft. The nice thing about this is that you can also get Part 121 certification in the purchase package. So if you're set up to operate an airline, you've got some engines, you've got some aircraft, and you've got a Part 121 cert. So somebody who's not downside. Go for it. No, yeah. What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, if you want to operate a trio of ex-US Airways, ex-American, ex-New Pacific, ex-whatever airlines, you could do it. I dare you.
You do it. I dare you. That's the best reason to start an airline ever. Someone dared you to do it.
There are worse ideas to start an airline than
there
that.
Certainly are.
I guarantee it.
All right. On that note, I think we can say that this episode is over. This has been episode 361 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick here, as always, with
Jason Rabinowitz. Thanks for listening.